See a lot going on across the country, and we are here on the network covering all of those high-profile cases in criminal trials. I want to bring on one of our favorite guests, Mark Eiglarsh. She's with us from Florida. And because we have you from Florida, I want to talk really briefly about this Casey Anthony defamation suit, Mark. Roy Kronk, who's the meter reader who found little Kaylee's body, was sued several years ago. He sued Anthony several years ago for defamation, and now they're in bankruptcy proceedings because Anthony is going through bankruptcy, and he is trying to get this to go to trial, either in state or federal court. Do you think he has a chance of at least getting to trial with this case?
Probably not. I think that the chances of success on this lawsuit are about as great as my chances of finally making the NBA. I just turned 50 and I suck at basketball. So, no, I don't think this is going to have much merit. If you want me to break it down, I will.
But explain this to me, because, you know, he is right that, you know, Jose Baez during the trial really started pointing the finger at this guy as the killer. And that's pretty defamatory.
Hold on. Stop there. Jose Baez pointed his finger at Kronk. Stop there. Have you ever heard Casey Anthony, and just in the interest of disclosure, I'm not a Casey Anthony lover at all, but I am interested in defending, you know, lawsuits that are not, you know, with merit, I think. Jose Baez, the same way when I'm arguing in court to create reasonable doubt, point my finger at anybody I possibly can to help acquit my client. We don't have to seek the truth as defense lawyers. We have to seek acquittals for our clients. Prosecution has to seek the truth. So who was it again who said those things about Kronk? Before we even get to the next part of the analysis, who was it? It was Jose Baez, right?
But can he just go around? It's cool for him to just go around, even in the public sphere outside of court, trying to point the blame at somebody else that may have no relation to the case and damage their reputation, Mark?
Well, there's two different parts to your question. Can he do it in court? Hell yes. He better do it in court because that's his obligation, and that is to zealously defend his client. And if his client didn't do it, someone else must have done it, and you point to anybody that you can. Him saying certain things out of court, that's a different scenario, but that's not what we're dealing with. He's not being sued. She is. I've never heard that woman say a single thing about Kronk. How is this somehow being, you know, how isn't this being dismissed at this very moment is my question.
Okay, so let me ask you this. If Kronk had sued Jose, who was Casey Anthony's attorney, would you say the case would have a better shot? Or because he brought this up in a court of law, obviously there's really no case there, is what you're saying?
That's what you just said, yes. Court of law. You can't hold an attorney responsible for pointing the finger at other people. That's just part of collateral, you know, consequences when you're going to trial.
But you know what, though? I can kind of see it from his viewpoint, okay? Like, I know that you're allowed to do this in court, but it borderlines on unethical if a defense attorney points the finger at someone that perhaps there's really no evidence that this person actually committed the crime. And that can have a huge effect on a person's reputation, right? Even if it's technically the defense attorney's job to zealously defend Casey Anthony, these are people's lives we're dealing with here, Mark.
I think I'd be intellectually dishonest if I didn't absolutely embrace what you're saying. As a human being, it troubles me when I hear defense lawyers point the finger at other people, blaming the victims. Yes, I'm a human, I'm a father, I'm a loving soul, and yes, it troubles me when people do that. Now, putting that aside, the issue is whether there's any merit to this lawsuit, and there is not any merit to this lawsuit because a defense lawyer has to make arguments based on reasonable inferences. Now, I think there was more than enough to bring in Kronk and suggest something nefarious based upon the facts here. It's not like they just pulled him out of nowhere. He discovered the remains. He's there with the body. Did he plant the stuff there or didn't he? I need to be careful because I could be sued. All I'm saying is that that is a reasonable inference to be made by a defense lawyer and it wasn't even made by the person he's suing.
Okay, but one thing, according to this lawsuit, he is claiming that Anthony specifically, now I don't know where he's getting his evidence, but he is claiming that Anthony specifically instructed his lawyer, her lawyers, to go after Kronk.
Sure. So now you got to what? Put Jose Baez on the stand, and Jose Baez is going to give up his budding career and violate the attorney-client privilege and say now everything that his client told him to argue in court, which probably didn't happen. I'm guessing that Jose figured out who to blame on his own. But let's just say that she said, Jose, you must argue, because you don't know what you're doing, that it was Kronk who must have put the, had responsibility for her being missing. Please, it's never going to happen. They factually can't get to that point.
All right. Well, I do have some sympathy for this guy if he really wasn't involved in all, and for him to kind of have to face the wrath of the public attention and some people thinking he may have done that. I certainly feel sympathy for him for that.
Well, hold on. Let's skip to the next part. Okay. Who nowadays feels that Kronk is anything other than a nice guy who just happened to discover bones? Okay. Or remains, as we would call it. There's no lasting negative impact. It's going to be difficult for him to prove that he suffered any kind of damage. But then let's get to the next hurdle. Let's say there are damages. Let's say that at the time you can say that he lost jobs and thus he lost money or whatever he's going to come up with, which I don't think is the case. But let's say we get to that point. Who are they collecting from? The gal who just went through a bankruptcy? They're going to do all this to get a piece of paper, at best, to say that somehow she owes money to them.
I think she actually is a budding artist, so maybe she's making some money off of that so she could give to him, apparently. Okay, Mark, let's switch now to this other case that we're following out of North Carolina, and that is the case of Wallace Bradsher, who's on trial in this really convoluted but very interesting public corruption case. And this is kind of crazy because you actually have the defendant himself, who was a local district attorney. He was the top dog in the county prosecuting criminals. He is now charged with he's facing 6 charges, including felonies, and he's now defending himself, cross-examining witnesses, including his buddy, former buddy, the former prosecutor that was allegedly involved in this huge plan. What do you think of this case?
I think he's a fool for so many reasons. I don't know if he's guilty yet. We'll get to that point. Let's work our way up to it. He's a fool for representing himself, right? He knows that. He who represents himself has a fool for a client.
I gotta say, I just want to stop you right there, Mark, because I kind of thought the same thing, too. There he is, the defendant, then his mugshot, you can see. He got a little heavier, I think. Anyway, I thought the same kind of thing, but I listened to his opening statement, Mark, and I don't know if you got the chance to listen to it, but it was pretty good. Like, he really has that kind of country, I'm just here to do the right thing kind of attitude. I bought it.
You know who would also come across that way? Someone he paid money to represent him, okay? And he gets to sit there and be quiet and not take the risk that someone on that jury is just not going to like him, okay? So I think he should have kept his mouth shut and let someone else make that, country opening that you so love. So that's the first mistake. But let's get into some substantive things that he did, okay? At a minimum, you must concede that hiring your own wife is at a minimum creating an image of impropriety. Can we all agree there?
Yeah, that was pretty stupid.
And then when it comes to your attention that there's a problem with that because they got noticed, then they say, so we'll swap? You'll just be her supervisor. I'll be your wife's supervisor. And that doesn't raise a red flag? I'm just saying, I'm not saying he's guilty of anything, but we're getting closer to a greater degree of impropriety that makes you go, yuck. And I would expect that from a government employee, but from a prosecutor who's supposed to be beyond this type of behavior, this makes me sick.
It should make anyone sick, especially people that care where our taxpayer money is going, because there was a lot of impropriety here. But here's what I don't understand about this case. I guess the state is trying to say that Wallace Bradsher was really the mastermind behind this whole plot. However, as skeezy and gross as it is that they did this wife swap, his wife, Wallace Bradsher's wife, who's the defendant in this case, actually did work. She was collecting a paycheck, but she did work. The co-defendant who took a plea deal's wife admitted on the stand, and we were just listening to her testimony, that she did no work whatsoever, at least not after the first beginning of her employment.
Yeah, two things. One, I think you make a great point. You should probably be representing the guy. You make an argument like that, that will resonate. You'll just need to draw a little Southern, and it'll be more received positively.
I did live in the South, so I could do that.
Yeah, and then secondly, I love that you said skeezy. I think that's wonderful. I never thought you'd say that word, and you did. But you're making the best argument for the defense. It's not unlawful. It might have the image of impropriety, as Mr. Eiglarsh so suggested eloquently, but it's not unlawful. And then she actually did do work, so that's not guilty. Maybe they flipped the wrong person. Maybe they gave a deal to the cooperating guy, and they shouldn't have. He should be sitting there.
Okay, so Mark, what we're going to do right now is we're going to listen. There is Cindy Blitzer. That's the wife right there. And I got to tell you, she's a very compelling witness to listen to. We're getting a lot of people watching her testimony because a lot of interesting details are coming out. So let's take a listen to some of her testimony from earlier. And when we come back, we'll discuss.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're starting to get an understanding of Cindy Blitzer's role in all of this. Cindy Blitzer is the wife of the co-conspirator who took a plea deal in the Wallace Bradsher case. So what happened is Wallace Bradsher was the district attorney. His buddy, another district attorney with the last name Blitzer, Cindy Blitzer is his wife, they came up with this plan to employ each other's wives. Cindy Blitzer says when she first came to Wallace Bradsher's office, she started getting some work, but she described kind of an odd situation where, she didn't have a computer, she didn't have all the things she needed. Mark Eiglarsh is with me on the line. What do you make of her testimony? Because you see really a marked difference between the direct, when the prosecutor in this case, and there's two prosecutors, so don't get confused, but when the prosecutor actually prosecuting this case is questioning her, and then during cross, when you have Wallace Bradsher, who's the defendant, asking her questions. How do you think she came off?
I don't think that they're going to all love her. I think generically, to find 6 people who like a particular witness or a defendant, quite frankly, who's representing himself, is very difficult. I've rarely seen someone say that all jurors loved a particular witness. So everybody is a liability. But specifically in this case, the fact that she wasn't charged, the fact that her husband wasn't charged, I mean, really, they're going to walk away. They were charged, but the husband's going to walk away with nothing. And this guy's facing 18 years in prison, is not going to go over very well with jurors if they're reasonable-minded people. It seems wrong that he's not going to face anything, and this guy's getting 18 years.
Yeah, that's what I don't get. And not only is he not facing anything, but Cindy Blitzer, who you just heard testimony, she's also not facing any charges. And during cross-exam, we got a little into that, asking, were you promised anything? And she claims no. But she potentially could have also faced charges because she was the actual person who did this.
She knew her husband was benefiting to the tune of $40-some-odd thousand while she was not doing the work that he hired her allegedly to do. That defrauded taxpayers. Those people sitting on the jury, they're taxpayers. They're the ones who paid for her to do nothing. I'm sure that they don't love her.
And not only that, now, the cost of a trial. And this is what you knew it was going to happen like this, Mark, when you have a trial where a district attorney is the defendant. It's not going to be a short 2-day, 3-day trial. He had the co-defendant, Mr. Blitzer, on the stand for 3 days. I think it was about 2 days of cross-examination. This trial, it started this week, but it's going to, for kind of what we're dealing with here, it's going on a long time.
Okay, you just gave another reason why I think that anyone who represents himself has a fool for a client. 3 days of cross-examination, thoroughly and completely unnecessary. Your job is to discredit the witness. It doesn't take that long.
Yeah, I mean, to go on and on, I thought it went on way too long with the co-defendant. I get that he was a key witness in this case. However, you get to a point, you have to be smart in your legal strategy. You have the jurors sitting there, they're missing out on their families, their jobs, whatever it is, and they're going to get pissed. This guy is on the stand for so long, and it's being asked, in my opinion, the same questions over and over again.
That's correct. And again, it goes to likability. You say, well, he came across well to you. Yeah, maybe an opening statement before they know much. And then eventually, if they, fish stinks after a while. So do defendants asking questions for 3 days, So I just don't think that he can pull it off, especially if he's the kind of guy who thinks that hiring his wife to do nothing is lawful.
Okay, and here's the other weird thing, and I don't mean to get petty here, Mark, but this guy was on the stand, and this is Mr. Blitzer, the co-defendant who took the plea deal. You can see the video here. And he always wore the same thing every single day. I just didn't understand that. I mean, I know that's a silly thing, but why was he wearing the same jacket every day?
I have no idea, but I'm sure you're not the only one who noticed.
It bothered me. I mean, I feel like the jurors would think about that, too.
I got to be honest with you. I didn't notice the clothing, but I certainly noticed that he's named after one of Santa's helpers, And
Blitzer. He's also named after one of our editors here on Law&Crime, with no relation. Okay, so let's turn briefly back to this case, because I want to, Mark, continue playing the testimony of Cindy Blitzer. We were just playing during the lunch hour, just her explaining how she went to Bradsher's office and how she kind of had a weird situation. She had a desk, there was no computer. She was handed a case at first, but now I want you to hear how this kind of dissolved into a situation where she was basically pulling in taxpayer dollars for doing nothing. Take a listen.
All right.
Bradsher.
Of obstruction of justice and a misdemeanor failure to discharge the duties of his office. Of course, the whole scheme or alleged scheme is that he worked with this other prosecutor to switch wives, and Cindy Blitzer was the one that worked with Wallace Bradsher, and you could hear her right there testifying to the fact that, yeah, she got some work at first, but then she wasn't really getting any work after that, but still submitting what they call a beacon. I guess that's like their timestamp program where you'd submit to get a paycheck. I'm here alongside Mark Eiglarsh from Florida, criminal defense attorney in Florida. See, this is, I don't know if you're listening to that testimony, but it was very interesting because she never directly said that it was the defendant that told her just to input in the time cards and she wasn't doing any work. But she's saying that her husband, Craig Blitzer, talked to Wallace, and Wallace is the one that told her husband, who then told her to do that. That's a little suspicious in my mind.
The whole thing is, I think that you have to, when you're calling a flip, these people are flipping against him. When you're calling a state or government witness to the stand, you've got to humanize them. You've got to have them admit what they've done wrong. And that makes them look more credible, I suppose. The problem is it also makes them look a hell of a lot more guilty. It makes them look like they've committed the crime and that they're up there enjoying their freedom and have no threat at all about going to jail. Yet the guy sitting there, he's facing 18 years. It doesn't seem right.
Let's talk about the actual charges. So we're dealing with felony obtaining property by false pretense, aiding and abetting, conspiracy, 3 counts of obstruction of justice, and a misdemeanor failure to discharge the duties of his office. As you said, 18 possible years behind bars. That's probably on the high end. If he is convicted, I'd expect probably it won't be that long. But on a case like this, where it's kind of, from my understanding, turning into a bit of a he said, she said. In other words, well, my husband talked to him who told me that I could do this. You know, it comes down really with, you know, some what I'd call forensics, not in the typical sense, but actual evidence, that it really is a case where it comes down to the credibility of these witnesses, specifically Craig Blitzer and his wife, Cindy, who is now on the stand.
And that's a problem for the state. They better have more. There better be someone else from that office to say that, you know, the defendant instructed them to not cooperate because he knew it was unlawful, and they had knowledge that these women weren't doing anything, and there's got to be more than just these people's testimony.
Okay, let's take a quick break, but when we come back, I'm going to bring Mark back in, and we're going to discuss more specifically about where we could see the defense going in this case. Stay with us. And welcome back, everybody, to the Law and Crime Network. I'm your host for this afternoon, Rachel Stockman. And in just minutes, when court resumes again, we'll take you back to that courtroom in North Carolina, where we are very intensely following this Wallace Bradsher case. He's the former district attorney who's on trial himself, accused of basically public corruption, hiring his friend's wife to do a job, a no-show job, and being behind this scheme to defraud the taxpayers. I'm here alongside Mark Eiglarsh. Okay, so we've now been in the prosecution's case, and it's been going on for several days. Wallace Bradsher obviously is going to get his turn to defend himself. He can't put himself on the witness stand. Obviously, I guess he could, because he could just say a statement. But what do you expect to see as we move towards the defense's case?
He makes it clear through any state witnesses that hiring your family members, including your wife, is not against the law. So we start with that. Secondly, you talk about what she did do. Your wife, his wife actually did some more stuff than the woman's testifying.
Yeah, she actually showed up to the job. She, according to all reports, she had put in enough hours to earn her paycheck.
Yes, and he's going to say, look, it's my job to find the most qualified people who I can trust for the position. I figured my wife, and I would say the same thing about my own wife. I wouldn't hire her because as a prosecutor, the image of impropriety is everything. And I think that's what this is at a minimum, potentially fraud, but at a minimum it's that. So I wouldn't do it. But if it was legal and I could, and it was an important position, I would consider it. I can understand why somebody would want to hire their own wife to do it. So that's what he's going to say, that she's a wonderful human being, the right person for the job, and she actually did do work.
Well, and it's interesting, during the opening statements, Wallace Bradsher, who is, of course, representing himself, that's his wife, Pam Bradsher, by the way, she was saying, well, when the people elected me, I had a private practice. I was a successful attorney, and my wife worked at my private practice, and they elected me to bring that, like, non-government private practice mentality to this official position, and my wife worked with me, so she was a key to my success when I was in private practice. So why not bring her along when I became district attorney?
I like it. I like those.
I like that.
No. I'm telling you, you should be representing him, or somebody who has your skills. For real. He shouldn't be representing himself. These are great arguments. The fact that she worked with him before, so he knows the energy they have together. He knows of her intelligence, her creativity, her passion to help the community. He saw it firsthand. Why would he go anywhere else other than his own wife to fill that position?
It's kind of sweet if you think about it. Maybe if you got the jurors to think that way instead of, oh my gosh, these are these corrupt politicians trying to scam us, he'd have a better shot. Well, let's continue to listen to more of Cindy Blitzer's testimony. This is where, Mark, it starts to get very interesting, because this is when she starts talking to the jurors about how she actually was enrolled in nursing school instead of doing her job. Let's take a look. All right, sorry there, it froze for a second, but you got the point, Mark Eiglarsh, about her testimony. She claims that she was trying to tell Wallace Bradsher that she had no work to do, but she couldn't reach him, so she told her husband, because her husband, he would respond to her husband, and that, you know, Wallace Bradsher said, no, just keep doing it, just keep submitting your time card without doing any work.
You're not buying it. And I heard you yell, "I'm not buying it," or whatever you said. Tell us why. Tell us why you're not buying it. I know you're the host, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Okay, now Mark's reversing the roles here. I'm not buying this, because if you're Wallace Bradsher and you're already doing something somewhat sketchy, right? That you're doing this wife swap, you know it doesn't look great. And you're Wallace Bradsher, the defendant, and the woman, Cindy Blitzer, comes up to you and says, "Gosh, can I have some work to do? I'm sitting here, not doing anything." Why wouldn't you just give her some work to do? That doesn't make sense.
There you go. So who was it? I think it was you, wasn't me, who said that this case hinges largely upon the testimony of these two witnesses, her and her husband, the two who got away with the exact crimes that allegedly the state believes that this defendant committed, and you're not buying her credibility.
Her credibility, and on the flip side, and we started to see a little bit of this, that we heard that they were in a really bad, the Blitzers were in a really bad financial situation. She had just taken out some massive loan. She desperately needed the money. I'm not sure why they ended up in such a bad financial situation. Maybe we'll find out. So it seems to me that maybe they have more motivation to want to get this paycheck and not work than Wallace Bradsher. Because what's his motivation?
Let me tell you how it works in the system here. Well, money's always the motivation, but here's how, because listen, he was a prosecutor. They don't make that much money, right? And so money is always going to be a motivation. There's 48,000 reasons why, he would do this.
And that's also how much money she made, too, by the way. That was very clever, Mark.
Yes, thank you very much. I thought that was obvious, but thank you for pointing that out. But here's the question. Why then did they cut a deal with these two people who clearly are admitting to the very crimes that the defendant's saying he's not guilty of? And sometimes it's a matter of, as we say in the business, who's first through the door? Meaning the first to run to the prosecutors and say, okay, I drew the line when he asked me to lie. I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's what he's saying. The defendant asked him to lie, and I wasn't going to be doing that. So now I'm here to cut a deal with you guys. And sometimes it's whoever's first through the door gets the best deal. It's certainly like that in federal court, and in this instance, I think it's the case.
Yeah, I want to hear more about that, because actually, if you know a little bit more of the backstory of this, Wallace Bradsher has he's facing a lawsuit, a wrongful termination type lawsuit, but he also then sued the state attorneys that are involved in this case as well. So it's all kinds of craziness that's going on there in North Carolina with these two former district attorneys. Let's continue to listen to more of Cindy Blitzer's testimony. Again, we were just getting into some really interesting stuff. She's a critical witness on this. And when you're listening to this, see if you believe her story of how this all went down.
There was
Okay, so not only did she fill out false time cards, the whole reason that they were false time cards was because she was going to nursing school and had to pass some of these tests to get in, and apparently she had employees also help her with that. Help her, she says, help her not take the tests as well. Right now, we are inside a North Carolina courtroom, the Wallace Bradsher case. He's on trial for several charges, including felonies in this alleged public corruption scheme where he allegedly, according to prosecutors, colluded with another district attorney to swap wives, and that Cindy Blitzer, who you just heard on the stand, apparently was paid for all these hours worked that she didn't actually work. I'm here alongside Mark Eiglarsh, and more as I listen to the testimony, I just wonder, I want to be in that courtroom talking to the jurors, wondering how it comes off to them and whether they think she's a sympathetic witness, because we just got into it a little bit, but apparently she also had employees in the office help her with the entrance exams, right? Help her with the entrance exams.
I don't think that you have to ask these jurors. First of all, I generally think all answers lie within. So you ask yourself, what do I think these jurors are thinking? You feel so passionately that her credibility is so grossly in question, you won't rely upon anything this woman is saying, okay? I know that about you.
No, but Mark, I want to ask you, do you believe her?
I wouldn't, no.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't. Even if her demeanor was different, even if somehow she didn't remind me of somebody who I don't particularly care for, I don't want to believe her. She got too sweetheart of a deal. What do you have, prosecutors, objectively outside this woman and her morally bankrupt husband? What do you have who got a sweetheart deal? What else you got?
I mean, this is what people, when you talk about politics and when you're voting for your local officials and even on the higher office, this is what people hate about politics. People think that our politicians are going behind our back and scamming us. And then you have a case like this, and it kind of proves a lot of what we suspect to be true.
But I would expect this from somebody, let's say, who's a commissioner and he hires his wife,
right,
or someone who's the mayor in some town. And yes, DAs, prosecutors are considered politicians, but to me, they're different.
True.
In my mind, I separate a prosecutor who should be beyond question, who has the image of impropriety that he or she must avoid at all costs. And the minute you hire a loved one, a family member, it is a slippery slope.
Absolutely. Red flag number 1, don't hire your wife. Red flag number 2, don't wife swap. In many reasons outside of this, too, not a good idea. And number 3, don't employ someone who's not working. Okay, this is certainly an interesting trial. So we had Cindy Blitzer on the stand. We're going to continue to listen to her testimony. This is the cross-exam where Wallace Bradsher, who's the defendant himself, is doing the questioning of his friend's wife. So it gets very interesting. Mark, I'm so sorry to say, I know you have to dash. We always love having you on the program. We'll see you next time.
Great to see you. Thank you so much.
Talk to you soon.